Tonight, President Biden saying a Russian invasion of Ukraine has begun. The president hitting Putin with a wave of sanctions targeting Russia's economy and moving U.S. soldiers in Europe to support NATO allies. Russia surrounding Ukraine with more than 150,000 troops, now positioning war supplies like blood near the border. Ukraine activating some of its reservists as Russian separatists ramp up attacks in eastern Ukraine. Is the region headed for an all-out war? The winter storm barreling east, packing snow, ice, and flooding rain. This 14-vehicle pileup shutting down a highway in North Dakota. Flood watches in effect from the Tennessee Valley all the way to New England, and another storm is moving right behind it. Verdict watch, the fate of 3 former Minneapolis police officers charged in the death of George Floyd, now in the hands of jurors. Prosecutors saying the 3 men knew Floyd needed medical help and did nothing, even saying one of them held down Floyd's legs while he said he could not breathe. Plus, the alarming spike in carjackings in cities across the country. A Philadelphia man now arrested for a string of car thefts that left at least 2 people dead. And in New Orleans, carjackings up 70%. So what's behind the recent surge? Also tonight, the former Ohio doctor accused of killing more than a dozen patients by over-prescribing them fentanyl. His defense tonight claiming he was actually showing compassion. And the wild police chase with a stolen party bus ending in a crash on a California highway. The moment police moved in to take down the driver. Top story starts right now. And good evening. The winds of war picking up tonight. Several developments out of Ukraine and the White House. President Biden announcing the first wave of sanctions against Russia, saying Vladimir Putin has begun an invasion. The sanctions hitting Russia's economy, including banks and the country's debt. President Biden also moving additional U.S. troops and equipment into NATO's eastern flank. American soldiers helping set up a camp in Poland for Ukrainian evacuees. Ukraine calling up some reservists as Moscow positions military weaponry and also supplies of blood near the border. 150,000 Russian troops also there, with some now moving into regions of eastern Ukraine after Putin formally recognized them as independent. Russia's parliament today granting him permission to use force outside the country. The conflict also rattling the economy, the S&P 500 closing in correction territory and the Dow dropping nearly 500 points. Oil prices also surging after Germany halted a crucial pipeline in Russia. And the U.S. Secretary of State now canceling a meeting with his Russian counterpart. Let's get right to NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander, who leads us off tonight from the White House.
Tonight, President Biden's move.
There's no question that Russia is the aggressor.
Announcing the promised punishment after Vladimir Putin recognized the independence of 2 pro-Russian areas in eastern Ukraine and deployed Russian forces there.
I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates.
The U.S. slapping those penalties on 2 large Russian banks and on Russian debt, which the president says means Moscow can no longer raise money from the U.S. and Europe, and also sanctioning several Russian elites. The president today not mincing words.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
That after backlash over the White House's reluctance to call it an invasion last night.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law.
But critics say the president's moves don't go far enough. Republican Lindsey Graham tweeting President Biden is not seizing the moment. The sanctions outlined are woefully inadequate to deter Putin's efforts to redraw the European map and dismember a neighboring democracy. Former President Trump also blasting President Biden while praising Putin's justification for his move.
I went in yesterday and there was a television screen and I said, this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of the Ukraine. Putin declares it as independent. Oh, that's wonderful. This never would have happened with us. Had I been in office, not even thinkable.
Meanwhile, the president is touting Germany's announcement that it will suspend approval of Nord Stream 2, the controversial gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. While in the U.S., gas prices that were already at an 8-year high are now spiking. California yesterday hitting an all-time record, nearly $5 a gallon.
I want to limit the pain to the American people are feeling at the gas pump.
All right, Peter Alexander joins us now live here on Top Story from the White House. Peter, talk to me about the word invasion, because we know the White House at first wasn't using that term, but now it's clear President Biden has all bought into that phrase.
Yeah, that's exactly right. As the president said, this is the beginning of an invasion at this point. He said that there are going to be sanctions right now, but there would be future sanctions if Russia continues to escalate. Really, the White House right now is trying to calibrate its moves in terms of those sanctions to leave more available to them if Vladimir Putin goes further. A delicate dance, given the grave circumstances that we're witnessing right now, Tom.
And Peter, talk to us about that diplomacy, because there were some very high-profile meetings scheduled with both the Secretary of State and even the president himself, possibly in principle, meeting with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, that's right. The White House says that any summit between the two leaders is not in the plans at this point, and that Russia would need to de-escalate the crisis for it to happen. Also tonight, as you noted, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, just called off his meeting with Russia's foreign minister. It was scheduled to take place on Thursday, saying that Russia has made clear its, quote, wholesale rejection of diplomacy, Tom.
Peter Alexander leading us off tonight with that breaking news. Peter, thank you. And inside Ukraine tonight, there are growing fears over whether President Putin intends to deploy forces there after he ordered the deployment of troops to the pro-Russian region he already controls. NBC's Richard Engel is in Ukraine tonight with more.
This is what it's like to live in a Ukrainian village next to separatist areas backed by Russia. The Ukrainian Interior Ministry says separatist fire killed at least one man here. The separatists have dramatically increased their attacks over the last several days, goading the Ukrainian military to fire back, now that they're protected by Russian President Vladimir Putin and the 150,000-plus troops he has near the border. Overnight, armored vehicles without markings were seen on the move in the pro-Russian enclaves after Putin recognized their independence. People there speak Russian, and Russia already has thousands of troops there. NATO says more Russian forces have arrived. But Putin is now signaling he's interested in more than just territory Russia already controlled. On Russian television today, Putin said he recognized the independence of areas firmly held by the Ukrainian government, including a major, somewhat rusting industrial city of 450,000, Mariupol on the Sea of Azov. Tonight, protesters in the city gathered to support their government and denounce Putin.
Do you think that he's going to stop?
I'm afraid that he wants to keep going.
And if he does keep going, what does that mean for you, for the people here?
It means that it doesn't mean that it's a time of peace. It means that it's a time of sadness. It's a time of war, of death.
Living in the crosshairs in a nation Putin says doesn't and shouldn't exist.
And Tom, Ukraine's President Zelensky has remained defiant throughout this. He said that he will not give in to Russia's demands. And just tonight, he announced he's calling up the National Reserves. Tom?
Okay, Richard Engel with that new reporting tonight out of Ukraine. There have been a lot of developments there in the last 24 hours, so I want to bring in Stephen Pfeiffer. He's a former ambassador to Ukraine under President Clinton and currently a William Perry Research Fellow at Stanford. So, Ambassador, President Biden said the U.S. will hit Russia harder than it did in 2014 when Russia, of course, annexed Crimea. Do you think the types of sanctions Biden announced today from the White House, including on Russian oligarchs, will make any impact on his decision?
Well, the hope is that a combination of potential costs will have an impact on Mr. Putin. But I fear that it's fairly easy to see where Mr. Putin is going. The speech he gave yesterday was not just the rationale for recognizing these two little statelets in Donbass, but he basically laid out a case to the Russian public, I believe, for a much broader Russian military attack against Ukraine that goes beyond simply moving the Russian army openly into these two breakaway statelets.
Ambassador, when you say that, do you think this will be an all-out blitz, or do you think this will be sort of a piecemeal like he's doing with those eastern provinces in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, I would worry first about the two eastern provinces of Ukraine. I mean, Donetsk and Luhansk, about 35% of those have been occupied by Russian and Russian proxy forces over the past 8 years. Yesterday, when Mr. Putin recognized those two statelets as independent states, though he recognized them in the territory they had in Ukraine, that means 65% of the territory, which is still in the hands of the Ukrainian government. So will there be a Russian military offensive to take that territory? Mr. Putin today pretty much gave an ultimatum, but he also has forces positioned in other places where they could threaten the capital city. So the Kremlin has a variety of military options, and we're just waiting to see what the Kremlin does. I very much hope I'm wrong, but I fear there will be Russian military action that goes way beyond what we've seen to date.
So you have these sanctions coming from one of the biggest economies in the world against Russia. You also have the announcement from Germany about the Nord Stream pipe. That announcement from Germany, how much is that going to affect Russia and Putin's thinking?
My guess is that surprised the Russians. I mean, they've always seen Germany as a country that has a special relationship with Russia. And up until recently, the Germans have talked about Nord Stream 2 as a purely commercial project that should be isolated from geopolitical developments. Well, I think the fact that the German government now has suspended that pipeline reflects the fact that in Berlin, as in other capitals and in Washington, they really do recognize that the threat that Putin presents to Ukraine needs a strong Western response. And so I think you're seeing sanctions that were applied today, but also signals that there are even harsher sanctions waiting in the wings should the Russian military go beyond where it is as of this morning.
Putin's actions solidifying NATO and unifying Europe and the U.S. Okay, Ambassador, we thank you for your time tonight. We do want to turn out because we're following some major storms throughout the U.S., a pair of storms to be exact, marching across the country, slamming millions of Americans, near whiteout conditions leading to pileups on several highways, and Arctic blast plunging temperatures below zero in some parts. Jesse Kurtz got a firsthand look at that wintry mix in Minnesota.
Tonight, more than 35 million under winter alerts, bracing for a 1-2 punch from Mother Nature. Back-to-back storms marching east. Heavy snow pummeling the Great Lakes and upper Midwest. Some areas seen as much as 2 feet. Wind chills dropping as low as a bone-chilling 50 below zero, with wind gusts hitting 30 miles per hour. In North Dakota, near whiteout conditions causing a pileup just outside Fargo. More than a dozen cars and semis colliding along this stretch of I-94, shutting down parts of the highway for hours. Firefighters battling through wind-whipped near-zero visibility conditions to rescue the injured. A semi crumpling the front of this SUV. Authorities saying 6 were hurt in the pileup. Hazardous conditions backing up roads in northeastern Oregon, too. State police there say around 100 cars and trucks collided in numerous crashes on this stretch of I-84. Air travel brought to a crawl. At least 3,500 flights delayed today. This couple says their flight to Minneapolis had to circle the airport before landing because conditions were so bad on the ground.
And it was pure white. You didn't know how close you were, and all of a sudden you landed and you looked out and you could see the tip of an airplane over there in the corner.
We thought we were still in the sky because it was so white out.
High winds and snow causing those delays in the Twin Cities, where temperatures are in the single digits. Further north, 17 inches of snow piling up in Duluth since Monday. That city declaring a snow emergency.
I'm a little nervous driving from the snow here to the snow there, especially because it's been coming down so hard for the last 2 days in Duluth, and I don't think it's supposed to stop till like Wednesday in Duluth.
Milwaukee hit with freezing rain, canceling class Tuesday for the city's public schools. And warmer parts of the country hit with high waters. Stretches of Kentucky and Alabama at risk of flooding as 2 million people across the southeast face severe thunderstorm threats today. Now a wintry mix heads east to New England as millions more brace for another winter system expected to crawl from coast to coast into the weekend.
All right, Jesse joins us now live from Minneapolis. Jesse, we see the snow is still coming down tonight there. A lot of your story dealt with these storms crippling highways across the country. What's it like where you are in Minnesota tonight?
Yeah, Tom, you can see behind me here on a neighborhood street in Minneapolis, pretty much white all the way down. It is tough to drive on this. We're going slowly out here. The main road's a little bit better, but still treacherous driving here in the Twin Cities. This is what the snow looks like here right now. You can see it's pretty light and fluffy, and we've got wind that's been gusting throughout the area. It's been coming down even in the last couple of minutes, and that is making that snow blow around. It has been snowing here in Minneapolis for upwards of 18 hours straight, but we've only got about 3 to 4 inches of accumulation here. You can see not much on the ground. That's at least in part because of all the snow that's blowing around, and it's only 8 degrees right now here in the Twin Cities, so you can expect it might get tougher to clean some of this up as the temperatures stay this low in the overnight hours. Tom?
Jesse Kirsch from Minneapolis tonight, where they are dealing with that snow and those chilly temperatures. Al Roker is tracking all the storms that are forming across the country tonight. Al, when you look at that map right there, you can just see them clear as day.
That's right. We're talking two of them, Tom. Here's the first one in the eastern half of the United States. That's tonight and tomorrow, pushing through the east into the mid-Atlantic states and New England. Well, we're also looking at this second storm out west coming out of the Four Corners. That's going to cause big problems during the week. Here's what we're looking at. 36 million people under winter weather alerts from New England all the way out west. Wind alerts from the Gulf Coast into the southwest and southern California. Flood watches up and flood alerts from Arkansas all the way up into New England because of heavy rain and melting snow. Here's that first system. Pushes through, brings heavy rain, warm, record warm temperatures along the East Coast. But then that second storm comes in out of the Four Corners. Significant risk of wintry mixes and accumulating ice ahead of it. And then as we move into Thursday, more rain for the Tennessee River Valley. Flooding going to be a big problem, but look to the north. We got an icy mix and snow. Then Friday, this system starts to make its way into the northeast. It's looking colder now, and so moderate snow for northern New England and parts of the northeast. In New York, we could be looking at icy rain snow mix, but maybe more snow than rain. Through Friday, anywhere from 2 to 3 inches. Really, the bullseye is down in the Tennessee River Valley. In between, we've got icing from New York, Pennsylvania, all the way down into Texas. And look at these snowfall amounts. About 6 to 10 inches or to a foot out in the Rockies. But look as we get toward the east. We're looking at 2 to 4 inches of snow across the upper Midwest. But here in the Northeast, this could be the sweet spot. Boston could be around 6 to 8 inches. New York City could be in play as well, Tom, for some heavy snow as well on Friday.
All right, Al, we're going to have to wait and see, and we know you'll be tracking it tomorrow on the Today Show. We thank you for that. We want to switch gears now to a pair of high-profile trials. We start with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Tonight, a federal jury finding the 3 men guilty of hate crimes, with prosecutors showing texts and social media posts laced with racial slurs. Our Ron Allen is at the courthouse.
Justice for Ahmaud Arbery! Ahmaud Arbery's family and supporters after a federal jury found 3 men guilty of hate crimes, violating Arbery's rights by chasing him on a public street and killing him because he was black. Gregory McMichael, son Travis, and neighbor William Roddy Bryan, already convicted of murder in state court, today also found guilty of attempted kidnapping, and the McMichaels guilty of using a firearm to commit a violent crime.
I'm glad that the jurors came back with the correct verdict, and we finally got some justice for Ahmaud.
Guilty on every count after less than 4 hours of deliberations. Prosecutors telling the jury racial hatred motivated the 3 men, showing texts and social media posts laced with racial slurs, revealing Bryan was angry about his daughter's relationship with a black man. The older McMichael making disparaging remarks about black tenants renting property he owned. His son writing a message about liking his job because 0 N-words work with me.
Why do you think it's important to pursue these cases? If you can't walk down the street without fearing being targeted because of who you are, then what kind of country can we really hope to build?
In Washington, the Attorney General vowed to prosecute more cases like this one.
I cannot imagine the pain that a mother feels to have her son run down and then gunned down.
The verdict coming on the eve of the 2-year anniversary of the fatal encounter, also designated Ahmaud Arbery Day to honor him by Georgia's legislature.
All right, Ron Allen joins us now from Brunswick, Georgia. You know, Ron, our viewers at home may be thinking, why did this trial happen if these men had already been convicted of murder? They were going to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. And you were telling me there's a very big importance that these men were also convicted of these hate crimes.
Yes, because this case highlighted race. It highlighted the fact that the prosecutors were able to convince the jury that the defendants acted out of racial hatred. During the course of the trial, the FBI was able to dig up text messages, social media posts that were full of racial slurs that the 3 defendants had spread around during the past number of years. For example, William Bryan, upset that his daughter was dating a black man or had a relationship with a black man. Travis McMichael saying that he was happy that there weren't any N-word people at his place of employment, happy that he could work in that kind of an environment. And so all of that was used to establish that their state of mind and that they had racist intents. And in the case of Arbery, when he's there in the neighborhood, they are acting because they see a black man running down the streets. They assume the worst about him, that he's responsible for robberies, all of which, of course, was not supported by any evidence. So that's the significance of this case, is that it focused on race. It focused on the fact that these defendants, these convicted killers, I should call them, who will now spend the rest of their lives in prison, acted because of who Arbery was, not because of anything else that they may have said. And that's what civil rights activists, social justice activists wanted a case to show. And it did.
Ron Allen for us tonight. Ron, thank you. Now to the verdict watch in the murder of George Floyd. Tonight, closing arguments in the case against 3 former officers present during the killing. The prosecution making the case that they knew Floyd needed medical help and chose not to act. But legal experts say they may be tough to prove. NBC's Megan Fitzgerald has those details.
The fate of 3 former Minneapolis police officers will soon be in the hands of a jury after both sides delivered closing arguments in the federal civil rights case. The prosecution making the case that these officers knew George Floyd needed medical help and didn't act, arguing that defendant Tu Tao stood for 6 minutes and stared at Officer Chauvin and George Floyd, and J. Alexander King was afraid to speak up to Chauvin despite checking Floyd's pulse twice and not finding one. Thomas Lane was holding down Floyd's legs, choosing not to stop the horror unfolding right under his nose. Legal experts say the prosecution has to prove willfulness, that the officers intended to break the law.
How difficult of a case is this for the prosecution?
This is a tough case for the prosecution because the government has to prove what was going on in the mind of these 3 defendants, that they knew that Officer Chauvin was acting illegally.
All 3 defense attorneys told jurors their clients didn't know Chauvin was committing a crime, and they deferred to Chauvin because he was the senior officer. Yesterday, Officer Lane testified that he did everything he could to help Floyd, even asking twice if they should roll him over. Lane said, "I remember Mr. Chauvin saying he is good like this when I said I was concerned." While Tao told jurors he was relying on the other 3 officers to care for Floyd's medical needs while he controlled the crowd. But it will be up to the jury to decide if the prosecution proved its case. Megan Fitzgerald, NBC News.
Next up, the city of Philadelphia today announcing a major arrest in the case of multiple carjackings and homicides. It comes as the city is dealing with a surge in crime, including carjackings, being up, get this, almost 6 times compared to 2 years ago. And Philly isn't the only city dealing with these violent auto thefts. Isa Gutierrez has a story.
Tonight, as Philadelphia deals with a surge of carjackings this year, a suspect alleged to have been involved in a string of them that left at least 2 people dead arrested. Local and federal authorities in Philadelphia announcing that 28-year-old Jonathan Akubu has now been charged with several counts of murder, aggravated assault, carjacking, and robbery. Police say he's a repeat offender with a long list of prior offenses.
7 prior arrests, including 3 for aggravated assault, point of handgun, 1 for robbery, point of handgun, 1 for robbery other, 1 for rape, and 1 for criminal registration.
Akubu is accused of being the ringleader involved in the February 6th fatal shooting of George Brasilla during a carjacking while Brasilla was visiting his mother. The city has seen 203 carjackings this year through February 22nd, compared with the 76 carjackings through the same date in 2021 and 34 in 2020, according to the police department. But Philadelphia is not the only city seeing a rise in these violent crimes. New Orleans also plagued by carjackings. So far this year, up more than 70% from the same period last year, which was already double the year before that.
I'm prior military. If I have to pull this trigger, that's what I have to do.
A mother and veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan recently having to fend off a person attempting to enter her car while she was stuck in traffic, and with her 2-year-old son in the car.
It's terrifying at this point. Having to use the same tactics in an American city that you use in Iraq and Afghanistan simply to navigate through the city is It's scary.
Crime experts say the rate of violent crimes across the country has grown since the pandemic began. Retired Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best says many departments are now putting together task forces to combat these increases.
Carjacking, while it has a unique name, is robbery, like any other robbery. And any robbery is super violent in nature, is very personal to the victim. Often a person is armed and there's a knife or a gun or some other type of weapon that's displayed, and there's an increased fear for personal safety.
Back in Philadelphia, authorities urging caution, saying there are several carjacking rings still operating, even with a kubu off the street for now.
To all those who seek to sow chaos in our city, let today send a message that we simply cannot and will not tolerate these acts of violence.
All right, Issa joins us now live on set. So, Issa, these carjackings are completely out of control. In Philadelphia, what are they doing?
So right now, the Philadelphia Police Department has created task forces to address carjackings as well as gun violence. They say that they're working with federal authorities right now to try to stop this increase in violent crimes across the board that they've seen over the last 3 years. Now, of course, whether these efforts are going to be effective remains to be seen in these numbers.
They have to do something. All right, Issa, we thank you for that. Still ahead tonight, the doctor on trial for murder. He's accused of killing more than a dozen of his patients by over-prescribing a dangerous opioid. But he says he was just trying to provide comfort. How his victims' families are reacting to that defense and who's defending him tonight. Plus, the new video showing a group stealing $25,000 worth of clothing from a high-end store. The search tonight for the suspects. And the police chase involving a party bus stretching from San Diego to L.A. How the wild scene came to an end. Stay with us. Top story just getting started on this Tuesday night. All right, back now with a strange story. It involves the trial of a Columbus doctor accused of murdering 14 of his patients. Prosecutors saying he intentionally overdosed them with fentanyl. The defense arguing he was just administering comfort care. Zincle Esamoah has more.
Tonight, the trial begins for a doctor accused of murdering his patients by over-prescribing fentanyl.
His actions were not mere accidental or medical negligence. They were, in fact, murder.
Former Ohio doctor William Husel walked into court Tuesday morning hand in hand with his wife. The 46-year-old now faces 14 counts of murder and has pleaded not guilty.
Many were not in a position to feel discomfort, pain, or agitation. Nonetheless, they were administered large doses of fentanyl without being medically indicated.
Those 14 people, ages 39 up to 82, died at Mount Carmel Health in Columbus, Ohio, between 2015 and 2018. 64-year-old Bonnie Smith was one of them.
A picture of her, the love of my life.
In a 2019 wrongful death lawsuit, David alleges his wife was given 600 micrograms of fentanyl and 6 milligrams of Versed. She died while Husel was the ICU physician.
He was a doctor. I figured he knew what he was talking about.
Husel has denied negligence.
The problem is that the doctor gave much, much higher doses of fentanyl.
Robert Klitzman is associate director of Columbia's bioethics program.
Even if this was comfort care, you wouldn't give 10 times usual dose or 5 times usual dose.
Husel's medical license was suspended by the State Medical Board of Ohio, and the hospital fired at least 23 staff after reviewing Husel's patient cases. Now, defense says,
this is not a murder case, and it's far from it.
Husel is represented by defense attorney Jose Baez, whose former clients include Casey Anthony, Harvey Weinstein, and NFL player Aaron Hernandez.
William Husel was exercising compassion to his patients and trying to free them from pain.
What does the comfort care argument entail?
There's a difference between what's called palliative care and killing someone intentionally. In palliative care, you're trying to ease the patient's pain by the use of drugs or some other therapeutic method. In cases where you are actually trying to cause the death of the person, then that can be murder. So the key here is intent.
The assistant Franklin County prosecutor adds that while other health practitioners cared for the patients, Husel is on trial because he prescribed the medication. The defense disagrees.
There are no pharmacists on trial here, but yet they're 50% responsible for every single dose that's given.
Expect this to be a theme of the defense. It wasn't just my client. There were many other people
All right, Zinkley Asamoah joins us now live from here at 30 Rock. Zinkley, we saw there the doctor has a serious defense attorney in Jose Baez. He's not going to make things easy for these prosecutors. So what's the key evidence the prosecution intends to show to prove their case here?
Yeah, Tom, so the key evidence will need to show that the doctor intended to harm these patients. Analysts say we're likely to hear from around 50 witnesses who will provide firsthand accounts of what they saw or experienced. And we'll also hear from experts who can speak to the best practices for medical care. And Tom, I spoke to the lawyer for David, the now widow of the deceased patient, Bonnie, we heard from earlier. And he said in addition to this criminal case, there are also ongoing civil cases from these affected families. So there's a lot to watch out for, Tom. And this murder trial will likely last for 2 months.
All right, we are back now with Top Stories newsfeed. Authorities in Atlanta are searching for a group of people who ransacked a high-end clothing store. Surveillance video, take a look, shows the suspects snatching clothes off racks and mannequins and knocking over displays. The group nearly clearing out the entire store. Police believe they took off with more than $25,000 in merchandise. A woman has been arrested after leading police on a chase in a stolen party bus. Police say the 40-foot bus was stolen in San Diego when the driver got out of the limo to pick up a client. Authorities trying to stop the vehicle on at least 3 freeways before it slammed into another car hours later in Los Angeles. Officers then moving in to take the driver into custody. At least 1 person was injured. And the U.S. Coast Guard rescued a shark bite victim off the coast of the Bahamas. New video shows a helicopter crew airlifting the 51-year-old man off the fishing boat. Officials say the shark bit the man's arm while he was fishing. Another crew member placing a tourniquet around that arm to stop the bleeding. The victim was taken to the hospital and is expected to be okay. All right, we continue now with our reporting on Russia, some insights into Vladimir Putin's next potential moves. It may come from what he has said and done in the past, including other Russian wars he has led. Keir Simmons is in Moscow with that story.
Tonight, the world again left wondering what Vladimir Putin has planned. We know what he thinks. Today on television, again saying Ukraine could end the crisis by renouncing its ambitions to join NATO. And his hour-long unscripted appearance last night, a more extreme echo of speeches he has made for 15 years. Railing against NATO in a famous 2007 speech, stunning Western leaders. Just this past July, writing Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single, whole.
He's been in power for 22 years, so he doesn't think that anybody has any advice to give him anymore.
And we know what he's capable of, with thousands of Russian troops on Ukraine's border. Tonight, Russia's lawmakers approving the use of force. President Putin so far apparently undeterred by threats of sanctions and dismissing criticisms, including in our interview last year.
Do you worry that your opposition to NATO has actually strengthened it? For 6 years, NATO has spent more on defense.
That's some defense. Some defense.
He's gone to war 4 times. Chechnya, 1999, Georgia, 2008, Ukraine, 2014, Syria, 2015. In every single war, he's won. And that makes him more dangerous. I think he thinks he can win again.
All right, Keir joins us now from Moscow again tonight. Keir, we heard Ambassador McFaul there mention President Putin's sense of invincibility, if you will. Is there anything intelligence experts have said that can be done at this point to prevent Putin from doing a full-scale invasion into Ukraine and through Kyiv?
Well, here's the challenge for intelligence chiefs, Tom, and I laid it out in my report there. We know what President Putin thinks. We know what he's capable of. We don't necessarily know what he plans to do. There are signs, clearly, Russians, for example, pulling out diplomats from their embassies in Ukraine today. But does President Putin just intend to invade Ukraine and there's nothing we can do to stop him? Does he, in fact, want to wait and see what happens on those new borders of that new republic that he declared on that eastern side of Ukraine? Or is he going to pause for some time and just see how these things play out? It is very, very difficult to tell because as we've said many times, Tom, President Putin, he doesn't use cell phones, he doesn't use computer emails, he uses secure draw lines, and he has a very small group of advisors.
As the situation with Ukraine becomes more complicated and really it's going to become more violent, what are people in Russia saying? We heard a little bit from them yesterday in your story, but I'm curious if the sentiment is changing at all, because if you think about it, especially in that area of eastern Ukraine, there's a lot of families that are both Ukrainian and Russian.
It's such a good point, Tom. Really, Ukraine and Russia are so closely connected. What I think is interesting, when you've spoken to Russians in the past weeks and months, they've pretty much said there's not going to be a war. A war can't happen. Now they seem to say, we hope a war doesn't happen. As we mentioned last night, when I spoke to Russians on the streets, all of them said, we want peace. But we shouldn't be naive about the fact that there are many, many Russians who do support President Putin and think that President Putin is standing up for Russia.
Keir Simmons for us tonight, and with the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, time now for a special edition of Money Talks. It was a tough day on Wall Street as tensions between Russia and Ukraine intensify. The Dow plunging more than 480 points, the S&P 500 and NASDAQ both falling more than 1%, and oil prices approaching $100 a barrel as fears of conflict rattle investors. I want to bring in CNBC's Ron Insana for a top story debut. Ron, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it. So we saw today, we saw the markets down, not horrible, but they were down. The Dow falling for its fourth straight session in the wake of the new economic sanctions on Russia that President Biden announced today. You know, the market hopes to always predict the future, Ron. I know you know this better than I do. And some of this you would have to imagine was baked in. Is there still a lot of uncertainty out there? And by that, I mean, should we expect more drops in the market?
Well, I suspect if the situation deteriorates from here and sanctions become even more draconian than what the president and the Europeans announced today, then yes. And if oil prices were to spike above, let's say, $100 a barrel, that just adds to the inflationary pressures already evident in the U.S. economy. So all of those things, if they get worse, will be more, I guess, surprising, if you will, to the financial markets. It's interesting. You know, the Russian stock market is down about 25% year to date. So they know something over there as well. And markets, as much as they predict the future, in this instance, they're going to be slightly more reactive than anticipatory, because we just, as Keir just suggested, we don't know what's in Vladimir Putin's head. So it's really, at this point, kind of a day-to-day, moment-to-moment type environment on Wall Street.
I do want to talk about oil. We saw prices approach $100 a barrel, the highest in more than 7 years. You have the Fed planning on raising rates. How does rising oil and the conflict in Ukraine affect how the Fed is going to react?
Well, I think it really depends. If the Fed believes that rising oil prices and then subsequently prices at the pump were to rise materially and impact disposable income among consumers and really take a bite out of their ability to spend, they may be slower to raise interest rates. Right now, the markets are betting that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates in March by 1/4 point. And there are bets on Wall Street, if you will, or forecasts, I should say, that the Fed will raise rates at every meeting thereafter. Now, that assumes that the situation in Ukraine doesn't spiral out of control and adds even more uncertainty to the global and domestic economic outlook. So I think we're, again, going to have to wait and see. Right now, it appears it's pretty much a lock that the Fed will raise rates by 1/4 point in March, absent any real situation that becomes so catastrophic that oil prices spike dramatically and global economic uncertainty takes over not just the mood, but the reality of what's going on the ground, both here and abroad.
Well, Ron, on that point, I want to ask you, because, you know, we do live in this global economy now. We've been reporting about the Nord Stream 2 and how that's not going to happen anymore between Germany and Russia. So how is that going to affect oil and gas and really the overall economy?
Well, right now, you know, U.S. frackers, if you will, are producing more oil now that prices seem to be holding at these levels above $80 a barrel, which means that there are forecasts now for the U.S. to be producing in excess of 12 million barrels of oil a day in 2022. Thankfully, we're heading to the spring where the need to warm the houses of Europe will start to come down. So their need for liquefied natural gas or gas that would otherwise come from Russia will be reduced. And that's good news. So with the Nord Stream not coming online and the U.S. taking great pains to provide liquefied natural gas to Europe ourselves through Qatar and through other sources. We're trying to mitigate the impact so Europe doesn't feel the pinch nearly as much as it might otherwise.
A lot of natural gas also in Ukraine, so we're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. Ron, we love having you on Top Story. We thank you for your time. Now to Top Story's Global Watch and the deadly mine explosion in Burkina Faso. The blast taking place at a gold mining site in a rural part of the country. At least 60 people killed and more than 100 others injured. Nearby homes also destroyed. The cause is under investigation, but officials believe chemicals stored at the site are to blame. All right, and a suspect has been arrested after an hours-long hostage situation at an Apple flagship store in Amsterdam. We told you about this earlier in the broadcast. Look at these videos now. They were posted to social media. They show the man who police say was armed with a gun inside the store. Several people inside managed to escape after several hours. Police say the suspect ran out of the store when officers hit him with a car and took him into custody. No word yet on a motive. All right, coming up on Top Story, the abortion battle in the Americas. Colombia now joining just a few countries in Latin America to decriminalize the procedure. The celebration's underway, but also tonight, the fierce criticism in the predominantly Catholic country. We'll take you there. And we are back now with the Americas, where we look at stories coming out of the U.S. and across Latin America. Activists in Colombia celebrating tonight after the country's high court legalized abortion up to 6 months into pregnancy. But the ruling also igniting criticism, with some critics calling it, quote, murderous. Priscilla Thompson has more tonight.
Tonight, across Colombia, abortion supporters celebrating after the nation's high court legalized abortion until the 24th week of pregnancy, some calling the move historic.
Una felicidad increíble porque por fin estamos logrando lo que nuestras mujeres históricas tanto habían luchado. Esto es historia. Es un gran logro. Creo que con la decisión de hoy ganaron todas las mujeres.
5 of the 9 judges voted in favor of a lawsuit that argued the previous ban discriminated against low-income women living in areas with less access to doctors and lawyers who could help them prove their pregnancy was a health risk. But not all in the predominantly Catholic country are happy about the decision. Anti-abortion activists also taking to the streets.
Es un retroceso porque la lucha por los derechos de las mujeres no es asesinar a otros.
Up to this point, abortions in Colombia were only allowed in cases of rape, fetus malformations, or when the mother's life was in danger. From 2006 to 2019, around 350 women were punished for abortions, according to advocacy organizations. At least 80 of them girls under the age of 18.
I see you with your green bandana on and a smile on your face. How does it feel?
We are thrilled.
Catalina Martinez Corral is among those leading the fight for abortion rights on the ground in Latin America.
Do you view this as life-changing for women there?
Absolutely. Because today women will feel comfortable to go to the health system and they are not going to feel afraid that they are going to be accused by doctors of committing a crime.
Colombia becomes the latest Latin American country to decriminalize abortions, Mexico removing criminal penalties for abortion last year. The procedure also legal in Argentina, Uruguay, and Cuba. But in other parts of the region, women continue to face harsh penalties as abortion remains illegal with no exceptions, including in Nicaragua, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, and El Salvador, where earlier this month, a woman was released from prison after serving a decade of a 30-year sentence, convicted of homicide after activists say she had a miscarriage. That woman now thanking the activists fighting to change the laws for her and others who are still behind bars.
Y sé que así como yo he salido este día, así también ellos un día van a poder obtener su libertad y van a poder estar con su familia.
Where does the movement in Latin America go from here?
I hope that this is going to inspire the movement to continue fighting to advance and liberalize these laws in the rest of Latin America.
All right, Priscilla joins us now in studio. And Priscilla, we see this happening in Mexico and now Colombia. This is a major moment for women's rights in these countries. But how does that information go from the high court to maybe some of the more rural communities in these countries?
Well, activists tell me they're going to be hitting the ground working to speak to women from and teenagers from the big cities to the rural areas, telling them about their new rights and this new law. They're also working to get any women who are in prison for having abortions before that 24-week period out. And at the same time, they say they are going to continue working to decriminalize abortion fully in both Colombia and across Latin America. Tom?
All right, Priscilla Thompson with our America's Report tonight. Priscilla, thank you. And coming up on Top Story, it's called a palindrome, and it happened today. 22-22 backwards and forward. It's the same. And because of that, thousands of couples tying the knot and some lucky families welcoming new additions on this special Tuesday, a date on the calendar you won't see for another 400 years. We'll bring you some special moments from today coming up. Finally tonight on this Tuesday, that's Tuesday 2/22/22, couples around the world making the most of this unforgettable date, and some newborns now with pretty special birthdays as well. Here's NBC's Dasha Burns.
Today, 2/22/22, is a Tuesday like no other. It's a palindrome date, the same forwards and backwards, and one that we won't see fall on a Tuesday for another 400 years, which makes today a wedding date apparently too good to pass up.
The twos, you know, they symbolize love, friendship, and so I thought it was a good, strong day.
Or perhaps it's just a future anniversary date too hard to forget.
It just flows off the tongue, 2/22/22. And very easy to remember, too.
Twosomes filling up chapels and courthouses across the country. In Las Vegas, the self-proclaimed wedding capital of the world, officials say they could set an all-time record. In Sacramento, California, couples married on the steps of the Capitol, the joint ceremony ending at exactly 2:22 p.m. And in Hempstead, New York, a wedding marathon. The town clerk officiating dozens of ceremonies back to back.
We saw this date coming up, and it was a day like no other.
And it's not just in the U.S. Couples in India, Malaysia, the Czech Republic, and even Russia taking advantage of the special date. In Berlin, newlyweds walking down a different kind of aisle, a supermarket chain holding Vegas-style ceremonies right in the middle of the store, Elvis impersonator and all. And the once-in-a-lifetime date creating some special birthday moments, too. New parents, Wendy and Mercedes, welcoming their son Logan at exactly 2:22 p.m. at Mercy Hospital in Rockville Center, New York. But this Tuesday, perhaps the most special day for the Spear family in Burlington, North Carolina. Dad Hank and Mom Aberly, a cancer survivor, bringing little baby Judah into the world at 2:22 a.m. on 2/22/22, of course, in labor and delivery room 2. Their team of nurses and doctors holding up their number 2s too. For the Spears and so many families, this Tuesday, a day too good to forget.
Dasha Burns, NBC News.
We thank Dasha for that story, and we thank you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you right back here tomorrow, but stay right there. More news now on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.